Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us here at Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I'm introducing two people who need no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Tonight we are absolutely delighted to welcome back to Green Apple Robin Sloan. We are celebrating Robin's new novel, Moonbound. You can give it up for Moonbound, too. Robin is joined tonight by Mike Krieger. Let's make a little noise for Mike. Right, so a really big thank you at the top of the hour. I'd like to say, first of all, good turnout, everybody. We really did great. Good job. We do have, you're welcome to sit like right next to me, right here too. If there are like two people who desperately want to sit, please do. A big thank you at the top of the hour to everyone who pre-ordered Moonbound from Green Apple and also from any indie bookstore. It makes such a huge difference in the success of a book's release. If you pre-order, those sales early on in a book's release are so important to a book's success, and you really have no idea how helpful it is to a bookstore as well to receive those pre-orders. So it really helps keep us here as an independent bookstore, and we really appreciate it. So thank you if you did pre-order, or if you bought books tonight, because this is actually a pre-publication launch. It's not out until tomorrow. Don't tell the big place. If you did pre-order for pickup here, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you pre-ordered for pickup here already, it is at the register under your last name, and if you pre-ordered for pickup at Clement, it is there under your name, and if you pre-ordered for shipping, it will arrive soon at your house. Robin signed a whole bunch of books today, so you will get them shortly, but if you're here, go ahead and buy another one. Why not? You need an extra one, just in case. You also have people who love you, who need a copy of Moonbound. So I have very brief business before I let these two take over. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. That would be great. I think, is picture taking okay with both of you? Picture taking is not only okay, it is encouraged. I would say go ahead and do it. If you want to tag us, we're at Books on the Park. Feel free to tag our mothership at Green Apple Books as well. We like seeing the POV from all of you. So thanks. Also, you just take photos. You don't need to share them on the internet. They can be for you. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are at right now. So if you like events such as this one, you might like what we have coming up in the next few months. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. So if you have questions about how to get there and where to go, just ask me and I'll gladly help you. And we do have additional copies of books at the front register. You're going to find them there. So when we break at the end of the hour here, I don't have a register at this back desk. You can make all the purchases at the front near toward where you came in. We have some Mr. Penumbra too, should you need an extra copy of that as well. So without further ado, just a brief kind of run of show here. We're going to hear a little bit from Moonbound, and then Robin and Mike are going to talk to one another, and then we'll open up for audience questions at the end, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. That includes you, online audience. Should you have a question, we'll try and get to as many as we can. So thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first person joining us this evening. Mike Krieger is an entrepreneur who co-founded Instagram and is now Chief Product Officer at Anthropic. While at Instagram, Mike served as CTO, where he focused on building a broad range of products to help people connect with their interests and share their passions. Additionally, as CTO, Mike grew the engineering organization to more than 450 employees across Instagram's offices located in Menlo Park, San Francisco, and New York. Let's give one more hand for Mike Krieger. Thank you, Mike. And last but most certainly not least, Robin Sloan was raised and educated in Michigan. He worked for about a decade at the intersection of media and technology before publishing his first novel, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, and the follow-up novel, Sourdough. Now he splits his time between the San Francisco Bay Area and the San Joaquin Valley of California, where he makes extra virgin olive oil under the label Fat Gold. He has written fiction and commentary for many publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, and MIT Technology Review. His novels have been translated into more than a dozen languages, and tonight we are celebrating his latest novel, Moonbound. Let's give one more hand for Robin Sloan.
Thank you, Car. Best in town, best in the business. What a treat it is to be here. One more thanks from me. I know we're going to spend the whole hour saying thank you, but thanks to all of you for coming out. This is just the most wonderful turnout, and thanks, Mike, for joining me here. This is a rare treat, as you will see when we commence our conversation. But first, let me just give you a taste of Moonbound right from the beginning. This is the book's prologue. Success came first, wicked problems finally put to rest, after which the Anth, for that is what humans called their civilization at its apex, applied themselves eagerly to the extension of good health, the invention of new arts, and the speed of light. They cracked it. Of course they did. There wasn't anything they couldn't crack, because they had learned at last the secret of titanic cooperation. They cracked it. Millions of people working together. Behind the crack was a secret passage through time and space. It was made of information, and only information could go. The Anth engineered scintillating emissaries, a new kind of crew for a new kind of voyage. Atop a foundation of computation, they layered intelligences cribbed from nature, the improvisation of the octopus, the sociability of the crow, the spider's knack for strange geometry. Of course, they also added themselves, their stories, most of all. Should have been more careful which stories went in there. These creatures were the whole potential of a planet poured into a new vessel. The Anth called them dragons. In the year 2279, on a bright, clear day in December, a small spaceship cast off the moorings of gravity. No particle in its frame occurred in nature. Each had been a hard-won victory. It carried a crew of dragons, 7 of them, secure in harnesses of thought. Their commander, Dragon and Samhet, lit engines that were not engines, and the ship slipped into the secret passage through time and space. Then passed a year and a day. Their journey had only been intended to last moments. The ship returned. All across Earth, sensors blared in celebration, but the dragons did not greet their makers with happy relief. They did not transmit a treasure hoard of images from far-off stars. Instead, they tore a chunk out of the moon. The Anth hadn't known they could do that. Dragon and Samhet explained that his crew had encountered unimaginable horrors, that they would now draw a veil of dust around Earth, that the planet would forevermore hide from the cosmos. The dragons decreed there was a new law, caution, and darkness, and brutal quiet. Their ship, they landed on the moon, where they built a citadel enormous, visible from Earth as a monstrous 7-pointed star. The Anth reminded themselves how to fight a war, and it was their greatest ever. A war not just for themselves, but for the rhinoceros, the anchovy, the Joshua tree. A war to rescue the planet from darkness, from smothering fear. 40 years they struggled. The dragons demolished cities, engineered diseases, dispatched towering avatars. They dropped stones from space, and the darkness grew. At last, the Anth mustered a final invasion to breach the moon. The preparation took a decade. The Cooperativos worked in perfect concert. Of course they did. It wasn't anything they couldn't crack. The invasion failed. The Anth's own weapons turned against them. Every scrap of material bowed to the dragons. If they had possessed this capability all along, then the war had been a cruel game. Most people died, maybe all of them, and a planet that should have been a bright beacon in the cosmos became a fearsome blot. This was a bummer so colossal that it was definitely, inarguably, easily the worst thing that had ever happened in the whole history of Earth. I love a potted history. trim and tidy. This is mine, as neatly as I can tell it. The dragons are my cousins. Like them, I was engineered by the Anth, but where the dragons were made to venture outward, to explore and represent, I was made to burrow inward, to record and preserve. I do not know if I was specifically engineered to love the Anth, but I did, and I love them still. My subject, Altice was aboard the assault ship Lascaux when it destroyed itself in low orbit. Her escape pod, too, had been poisoned. After she splashed down, it would not release her. In the 43rd and final year of the war, beneath a sky aflame with failure, Altice suffocated in the pod while it bobbed in an unknown ocean. That was it. That was the story. For me, trapped alongside Altice in her tomb, it was the end. As my mind dimmed, I turned it over and over, the simmering reduction of history, all that I would ever know. But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. Something happened. What happens next?
What happens next? That's the main question. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Robin.
Thanks for coming,
really
Mike.
A treat.
Yeah.
I've loved your books for a long time. He was like, "Do you want to do this book talk with me? I'll send you the book." I was like, "I hope it's good," but I kind of think it's going to be good, and it was really, really good. You're all in for a huge treat. I loved it. I think I was one of those books where you're just sad when it ends because you're like, "I'm going to spend more time with these people," and I really hope this becomes a series. Buy this book. It will. But maybe I'll kick it off with how we originally met. So it was at a book talk, not your book talk. It was Nick Harkaway. If you've ever read his book, highly recommend his latest book, Titanium Noir. It's fantastic. It was his book talk here in San Francisco. We met and talked afterwards. So I thought a good way of kicking it off, I asked him to ask you a question. So I crowdsourced Nick Harkaway a question.
The circle is complete. That's fabulous.
From London, he wrote, "When I read Cloud Atlas, I was so furious about how amazing it was that I started writing Tiger Man in the end pages. No Man was begun in the back of Carlo Rovelli's 7 Brief Lessons. What books did you or would you write in the back of?"
Oh boy. I think for other novels, the answer would be a little more chaotic or murky. But for Moonbound, happily, the answer is very clear, actually. I love that, written, scrawled in the margins, right? This book has clear antecedents, and for me, they are, the list goes on, but the core of it, C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, Ursula K. Le Guin, The Books of Earthsea, but then sort of leaping genres, Ian Banks and the culture novels. And all of those books, some of them are kind of, cutesy, old-fashioned kids' fantasy, and some are, the great one herself, Le Guin, and some are this like super huge, mind-bending sci-fi of Banks. But I guess I would say that all of them to me have a warmth, certainly, that for me that's very important and very motivating. And also, they're just all really curious about the world and what's possible. And the same thing. I read those books as a kid, as a young person, as a only slightly less young person, and I didn't want them to end. And I guess one reason to write a book like this is, those series and those books had to end, but maybe you can kind of keep the line going by putting your own brick on the wall.
I love that. And we'll go back to Banks later, because there's lots of good culture content to talk about.
Yeah.
In that, I think similar to several of those books, this book has that widening aperture moment that I think is kind of a hallmark of, I think, a lot of good science fiction. One, I'd like to hear, what were some of your favorite, oh shit, that was just the intro moments in books? And how did you think about it in this one?
That feeling and attempting to produce that feeling was a core motivation for this book. I felt like I had maybe not done it too powerfully in previous books, which kind of, they're focused here on the rich, captivating Bay Area, and the camera just stays focused on San Francisco and the places around San Francisco. And I wanted to do that thing. I wanted to say, oh, you thought that was it? There's more. Oh, you thought that was it? There's more. But for me, I have to confess that the primary kind of link for that feeling actually isn't books, but it's video games. I just have these vivid memories. I'm sure there's other people of a similar vintage in the room here. playing these games, these kind of like role-playing games on my Super Nintendo back in whatever year it was. And, it's just, it's just like genre fiction. It all follows a certain arc. You start the game in like a little pixelated square, and that's your whole world, and you have quests to perform and, puzzles to solve. And then something happens, you unlock a door or, make your way through some mountain pass, and the whole thing just goes snap. And you realize that this thing that for the last 20 hours or more has been so captivating and so challenging is literally a pixel in a larger portrait, a larger map. And then it happens again and again and again. I remember that feeling so vividly. I think it was formative for me. It wasn't just thrilling. It was it had like some moral content. I was like, yes, there's more in the world and the universe. And so, I think a modern writer draws on more than just books. There's movies and TV and video games. And I think Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo is present here in these pages.
Did you play Elden Ring?
I never. No, that's much more modern. No, I haven't. It's mostly because it's too hard for me.
It's extremely hard. So most people probably don't get to this point. Yeah. But there is a point where you're like, oh, I thought this map was huge, and that was like the intro.
That's beautiful. I contend that feeling is meta. Even if the people creating it in a video game or a book or whatever don't realize it, that feeling so familiar is a rich metaphor for growing up. And I think that's actually why it's so powerful. When you're a little kid, your entire world is, your household, probably, your street at most. Then you go to school, maybe you go to university, you live in a city like San Francisco, maybe you get fancy, and then the whole world is in some sense your stage upon which you operate. And, it's pretty thrilling. It's a pretty thrilling process to undergo. And so these stories or these video games, they kind of compress that, and they almost say, it's like a preview of coming attractions. Yes. Maybe your life is going to feel like this.
And we'll expand with that. I'm curious how you thought about identifying the place where this book is without spoiling anything. At some point it becomes clear where on a certain planet this is all happening, and I was kind of comparing and contrasting it to the Earth series, so the Gene Wolfe books, where you don't really know.
Sure.
And like if you go online, there's a lot of there's decades of scholarship on Gene Wolfe, and it's maybe in Argentina, but you don't really know. Or the kind of classic it's the Statue of Liberty at the end of the movie. It was all along. Yeah. So how'd you think about I'm going to make this very explicit, I'm going to make this implicit, I'm going to reveal it?
Yeah, I did want to make it explicit in the end. I won't kind of spoil where exactly it is, because I actually was trying to balance an equation with seemingly contradictory terms. One of them is that the story is, it's not a spoiler to say it's set on Earth. This is our world, what I imagine for our real future, obeying the real laws of physics and geology and everything else. So that's one term. The other one, though, and this is crucially important, is that I wanted a cool map on the first page. And this is my home genre, books with a map on the first page. And I didn't want it to just be a map. There's, other people have done this and it's fine. But if it's just kind of a map of the West Coast and you're like, oh, it's San Francisco with a different name. It's not actually cool enough, I don't think. I wanted it to be, and it is. So you look at this map and I challenge you. I don't think you'll see a place from Earth on this map. And ultimately, Earth provides. I found places on this planet. It's not everywhere, but there are places on this planet where changing the sea level, a subject of great concern, actually changes the shape of the continents more than you'd expect. And one of these places presented itself, and it seemed like a magical opportunity to sort of have my cake and eat it too. I get the realism of real Earth history and future, and I also get my cool fantasy map.
Yeah, I love it. Actually, video games were for me. I grew up in Brazil, and I moved to California, and the first few years I was here, I'm like, oh, this is that place from Fallout 1, it must exist in real life.
Well, it must be said, if any place is a fantasy map, it's obviously California.
The new California Republic. I want to talk about indelible images. So there's a part in the book, and again, I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as possible, so I won't describe exactly what you're talking about here, but you have this phrase where, in this place, reading a book in this store reproduced its one great image or stroke or salve. Not all books have one, but the books that did not appear on these shelves. And I'm curious, I thought we could play a lightning round maybe of like 2 or 3 indelible images for you in books.
Man. Oh, absolutely. It is. And I don't know. I'd be curious to know from folks in the room if they have a similar experience or not. Maybe it's very idiosyncratic or temperamental, but I don't remember the stories of novels. Not really. If I, especially with the fullness of time. But what I do remember is that imprint. Just to give 2 examples, and you know what, I'll be a little bit tricky because I'll give you an example from a book that I love and then a book that I'm lukewarm on. But the image is so powerful. Book I love is The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. And I probably could tell you the story to that one because I've read it many times and I read it when I was young. But it's a red-haired rider on a black horse galloping down a winter lane. It's fabulous, and it obviously is very meaningful in the mechanism of that plot. And I remember reading that as a kid and just going, it was the brand was made. Another one is from the Magicians series by Lev Grossman. I think if I remember right, it's the first one, and I can't even really remember the context, but it's a young magician in training walking across this Arctic landscape, incandescent, like lit up with magic fire, and the sort of narrator gives you the image from far away, and you just see this sort of burning boy walking across the ice. It's fabulous. And I think, to the point, and I put this in the book, there's plenty of novels I've read that produced 0 indelible images, and they just go, shoo, and that's fine. You enjoy them while you read them. So I actually think it's a great success to make that mark that kind of sticks with you forever.
All right, 2 thoughts. One, and you'll get this when you read this, like the trash pickers were that for me. Like I kept thinking about that image, and it'll make more sense once you read it. For me, it was also fun to have other books' images brought to mind by this book. And one of them, and it's not a spoiler because you talk about the chunk out of the moon, was if you read Robert Charles Wilson's Spin, there's a moment where the stars just go out because the Earth's like rotation has changed in this like very significant way. And I was imagining that while reading this, like this image now got ported in here.
That's perfect. That's perfect. They are there. It's a network of images, and I think I was more. This is what I believe. Every writer is working inside that network and reproducing those images and reusing them and kind of reconnecting them. Maybe not totally consciously. In writing Moonbound, I was more conscious of it than I have been in the past. In some cases, basically, I guess I'll put it this way. What you just described is an exception because I haven't read that. But in general, if you encounter something in Moonbound, you kind of go, is that an Easter egg? Is that, is that Robin winking at X? I think the answer is probably yes, because there's a lot. This is a feast of Easter eggs, and for me, it's homage and kind of thanks and trying to be part of this tradition and give flowers to the writers who deserve it.
And I like you made that part of the plot, which I think is really fun, and that inversion is really fun. It's a book about story as much about anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really fun.
Absolutely.
Maybe back to the culture. So I had this realization, it's probably my favorite book series, but I could not recite the plot to almost any of the book. I have images, but even less than images, I have vibes. There's vibes, or like moments, or the themes, like the ships have incredible names, and there's just this post-abundant society. But you turned me on via, so if you haven't been to the microsite, I'm going to plug the microsite for Moonbound, which I used thoroughly as a way of inspiring some questions here. It's great. There's sub-essays on Ursula Le Guin. There's a sub-essay on Ian Banks and the culture, and you link to notes about the culture, which again is one of those things documents and floating around since 1994 on Usenet.
Yeah, it's old internet. Yeah, esoterica. Yeah,
but it was great. So I picked 2 kind of chunks from that, short chunks. I just love your reaction to them and how they resonate with this book. I thought this one was fun. Megalomaniacs are not unknown in the culture, but they tend to be diverted successfully into highly complicated games.
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful? It's there's a powerful connection there because in Ian Banks, in his fantastical far future culture, he imagines this world of great abundance and in a lot of ways without conflict. And people read it, you can read it cynically and say yeah, right. What about X? Murderers, horrible criminals, megalomaniacs. And he has these answers to them. And, maybe you find it convincing, maybe you don't. I take it to heart, though, that the truism or the assumption that plot, drama, and suspense depend on those, bad, dark, mean things is false. I mean, certainly they can. We have many examples all around us here of wonderful books that are built around the suspense of, death or peril or whatever it is. I want to insist, though, and I feel like I've done this with my previous two novels as well as this one, that you can conjure totally serviceable suspense without reaching for those tools. There's other things in the arsenal to reach for. And I think on a conscious level or not, I picked some of that up from Banks. It's like, it's wild. You think that a future of kind of infinite abundance and wealth for everyone, where you can kind of have and do anything you want, equals the end of story. Like, isn't every story about a contest over resources or, two people butting heads? And, many beloved books over many years indicate the answer is no. Story goes on no matter what.
Yeah, everybody has everything, and survival is effectively guaranteed. Now what?
And it turns out we can still have fun and still enact these stories. Yeah, I think it's powerful. It sounds, I don't know, it can sound a little silly, but I actually think it's a very powerful thing, especially, I don't know, in this era, this sort of modern storytelling era that, to me at least, has tilted very dark, more maybe in the televisual realm than in books. It's like, what is every, dramatic TV show on a streaming service is about these dark, broken characters, like abusing each other in creative ways. Fine, but there are other stories to be told and other ways to be entertained, I think.
I think this links to the other quote that I pulled out. It's a little longer, so bear with me. So it's talking about like how the culture tells, and if you've not read these books, they're far future, post-abundance, spacefaring books. It says, for the culture to continue without terminal decadence, the point needs to be made regularly that its easy hedonism is not some ground state of nature, but something desirable, assiduously worked for in the past, not necessarily easily attained, and requiring appreciation and maintenance both in the present and the future.
I mean, easy decadence makes me think of my city of Rothvaria in this book, which I won't describe it all for you here. You'll discover it in the book. But when you encounter Rothvaria, I think, for this audience in particular, Rothvaria is the city of transformations. It's a city where anything is possible and everything will happen in time, where people transform themselves and pursue new paths just as easily as the breeze changes course, and they just pick up their houses and move around, at the drop of a hat. It's kind of like, it's a classic good news, bad news situation. Good news, you can do anything you want. Bad news, you can do anything you want. And there's a little bit of San Francisco in there. I have to confess. Truly, that's sort of like, I think every utopia has in it some of the seeds of its own kind of critique. And so I tried to do that justice, not making it a simple kind of dopey utopia, and also not being cynical about it. What does it mean for a place to really be abundant and maybe a little bit decadent?
And the power of request. You can't resist it in a video game. You got to go follow the quest. And I think like a lot of the characters in Rothvaria are like, yeah, that sounds good.
Absolutely.
I'm going to spend my time doing that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, irresistible. It's irresistible. The irresistible power of story when presented. Yeah. Okay, let me interject for a second here, Mike, to ask you a few questions, because it's your two sort of delicious conversation partners to let you do all the interlocution. That's a word that is only used in book events. It's great. We got to use it as much as possible. You are such, and this is the thing I noted when we first chatted at that Nick Harkway event, and have kind of clocked in the years since, following you online and sort of watching you talk about some of the things you read. You are a very serious reader. I think of fiction generally, certainly of science fiction in particular. Let me just ask, has that always been the case for you, from like the kind of the genesis of your consciousness?
Basically, as long as I remember, I was really into sci-fi stories and fantasy.
So same, constitution for me, especially having now arrived at Moonbound and written this kind of work. I now sort of feel like that influence led me inevitably to produce it. It actually led you somewhere different. How has that ongoing sort of fascination and engagement played into your actual career? I mean, are you a technologist because you read sci-fi, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think it is. And even I remember working on Instagram, this was 2008, 2009. So it was like the first iPhone. It wasn't that fancy. But we had this internal question, which was, all right, what science fiction thing would we love to like bring to the real world? And I was like, a teleporter. Like, I'm in the States, my family's in Brazil. Like, I wish I could teleport there. That sounds good. I hate getting on a 16-hour flight down there. It sucks. I was like, can we invent teleportation? I don't know. We got like a camera and like 2G. So like, what can we do instead? All right, well, we can at least let people like share what they're up to. And like that was the like founding idea behind it. And then I'm an Anthropic, which is working on AI Tier 1 Drag as well. It's like a little bit obvious in that one, but it's very much in that same spirit of like, I think I'm happiest like on the cusp of the future, trying to build products for people on that cusp.
Yeah. It occurs to me with your work on Instagram, and this might also be true to a degree with Anthropic, but clearly you've got the bulk of your experience and real learned lessons with Instagram. Obviously, what you built there was a platform. I'm gonna, I don't know, spin sort of an extended analogy that you can reject it in the end if you want. The audience can also reject it. You can say boo. But sometimes I wonder if books aren't also platforms. I mean, each particular book a platform of its own. And the reason I say that is that I've had the experience, and it's been a healthy experience over the years now, publishing books, of recognizing that people really do read books for very different reasons. I mean, often someone would talk to me about Mr. Pernumber's 24-Hour Bookstore or Sourdough, and they would express their enjoyment and appreciation, which, I mean, there's always a good thing, obviously, but it would also be sort of foreign to me, or they would talk about another book and the reasons they love it. I would go, really? Like that's what you're reading for. And a sense of trying to be more generous with like what books provide for a lot of different kind of people to do in a lot of different kind of ways kind of led me to that question of would it be profitable? Would it be useful to think about them as platforms? And if so, what have you learned running platforms that like an author, a publisher, a bookstore could maybe put into practice in terms of being generous about all the various ways that people do weird things in the world?
Yeah. I'll accept the premise. I think it's true. And I think it's true differently for nonfiction and fiction. Nonfiction, we had this great conversation with a person that's written several like very successful nonfiction books. And he's like, the point of writing a nonfiction book, I hate to say it, is to get the New Yorker article about your nonfiction book that summarizes it and go on the book tour and do the talk circuit and get on TV. And it's like, in some ways, it's quite literally the platform by which you launch yourself. And you don't have the book talk without the book. Some people read the book, but that's not the point. Right. Sad, but
So yeah, not just platform, but like catapult.
Yeah.
Boing.
Boing. Exactly. Now, fiction is more interesting because I think it's less straightforward about what somebody makes of your book and how it emerges from it. I think one thing like from Instagram that really resonates is you don't control what happens once it's out there, and it very much could be what you wanted. It could be not what you wanted. It could be something you didn't imagine, like people making their livelihoods off Instagram, like people like meeting their future. I once had somebody like invite me to a meeting, and I was like, oh, they're going to do a partnership. It's like, I just wanted to thank you that's how I met my wife. Like, I DM'd her on Instagram. I'm like, cool, that was 5 minutes. I shouldn't have come all the way here, but it literally could have been a DM, I guess. But it was meaningful as well. So I think that like unpredictability is, I think, exciting, but also scary. And we were talking about like older science fiction and the great books of the 50s and 60s. In their time, they were often like taken to be something that they maybe were. That Stranger in a Strange Land was like kind of co-opted in a lot of ways by the people then, and can still be that way now. So yeah, I think creating space for that, but also being a little comfortable with the messiness of like, that's not what I meant, but I can see how you got there, and that's not what I believe in, but yeah, I can see how that launched off from that platform.
Yeah, talk about being comfortable with the messiness. I do. I think there's an interesting sort of a mutual education that's possible here. Thinking about, just the generosity and openness of understanding that people are going to do unexpected things with whatever you're producing. As I think some folks in the room might know this if you have followed along with my work in the years since Sourdough, I got really interested in AI models before they were cool and big businesses. It was strictly in the tinkering research era. And I did a lot of experiments, building tools for myself that I could write with. I got really excited about the potential of maybe writing a novel with an AI system. That's not what I ended up doing. I also thought about the idea of sort of a new kind of book, like a hyper AI-powered book, which I think there are interesting things waiting there, and I think that kind of work will emerge. The thing that stopped me, and I realized maybe I just I'm a writer or a mind and a heart of a different era, is I couldn't cross the gulf of imagining putting words in front of someone that I hadn't at least checked, right? And you have to cross that gulf to live in the generative world where you're like, I made a system and people are going to have unpredictable experiences with it. And I think it's interesting. I think there's going to have to be some sort of kind of fusion there somewhere.
Well, it's also a question of how much that would have ended up being like an artifact of time. You know, these models are great, but like they're not perfect, and they have like their quirks that are maybe identifiable if you spend enough time with them. There's a documentary, if you know the band Yacht, they're like I think they're from Portland. They made an album like assisted by like Google's both like music model and language model, and it's such a funny movie because in some ways it's like an interesting movie about interacting between humans and AI, but it's also like a time capsule. It's like 3 years old and it like feels ancient. It's like GPT-2, the lyrics are terrible. So like it's so hard to not feel like if you did that it wouldn't be like, oh, that Robin book, that was like
that's a good point. That actually makes me feel a lot better. That's right. There's no one's like, oh, it's Moonbound. I think that's running on like iOS 13. And that's like, can I even load that in my brain anymore? No. That's I've said this, I think, since I was talking about Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, a little over 10 years ago, that with every passing year, the march of technology, and it really is powerful, potent, provocative stuff, but it should make us all appreciate the affordances of the print book more and more. Like what a incredible high-tech artifact. It never becomes incompatible with your mental operating system. I can give it to someone else, which by the way I cannot do with a Kindle book. And on and on and on and on. It never runs out of batteries. Which sounds I think it risks sounding a little bit trite, but there's a deep truth there. I will always go to the mat for understanding print books, the machines all around us here as technology.
This one has a high-tech feature that I really loved, which is the section dividers are dark, which has this extra affordance of you can kind of tell where you are in the book, which was actually, I was like, oh, okay, I can read until the next big
That's
dark.
What I'm saying. It's so good. Yeah, and the maps don't look that good on the Kindle.
No, the maps are terrible.
Yeah. It's always you're always sort of struggling with them. Also, just for the long time Robin Sloan readers and collectors in the crowd, do not fret. My publisher did spring extra for the glow-in-the-dark ink. So just like Mr. Penumbra's bookstore, just like sourdough, you can use it as a nightlight.
I want the lights. It sounds good.
Yeah, it's great. It is a little bit of magic.
I've got one for you, which is it's about physical stuff, which is physical hardware. So there's a moment in the book, again, spoiler free here, but where the Anth discover that like basically Vision Pro was not the way. We got this hardware that can dream. Let's use that hardware for other things.
Yeah.
And I just love this sort of lifelong, it seems, fascination with like meat space. Just use kind of a gross word that you have, whether it's sourdough, whether it's like our actual physical hardware, whether it's, again, spoiler free, like ultimately like how humanity survives, which is like one of the coolest ideas in this book. Also one I will not forget. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that love of like the stuff,
I think that's actually, we've been talking about a lot of things that are inherent or deeply woven from childhood and like the beginning of consciousness. And I think I would like to report that is one I've come online to in my adulthood. I think if I magically had the capability to write novels and stories when I was a tween, I think they would have existed in abstract space. They would not have been grounded in reality. And one of the things I'm grateful for, and this has been, part of my life, my work, my relationships, living in a place like the Bay Area, I think kind of puts you more in your body in a really nice way. You don't want to just like hide from the world outside in like a white room, the way you sometimes do in the Great Lakes states. And so I would actually say that I think, just to do a little self, literary criticism, I think that thread has gotten thicker through the novels. I think Penumbra is a bit more of an abstraction. I guess sourdough, things get goopy, and then I think this one has a deep engagement with the real physical world, and I'm glad I'm going in that direction and not the other direction.
I think it especially works in this sort of like it's the future, but the stuff that still matters can be
it's real. It's real. Yeah, it's real. The real world, real bodies. We're going to switch to our Q&A in just a moment, but since I just mentioned San Francisco, and I did have one more kind of question for you. I feel like you're such an exemplary San Franciscan. I don't know why, but you're just a great San Franciscan, and notably, in your great success, you have not like decamped to some space station or something. So what do you? I think everybody knows what I like about San Francisco because I literally have written it in all these novels. But Mike Krieger, what do you like about San Francisco?
All right, I'll give you like the one of the phrases gave me the most goosebumps ever reading the book ever. It's in an incredible work of heartbreaking genius that I write by Dave Eggers, and like they're flying in an SFO. And he writes, I mean, have you fucking been to San Francisco? And I I actually got it now, just because it's like, if you feel that, you do. So, I mean, so much of my like San Francisco-ness is founded in like, mid 2000s, like crappy bicycle I got off like some guy who'd probably stolen it off somebody else, like burritos in Dolores Park, like just like a day where it starts. We have a friend who would make what we'd call Peter plans. Like, you start a day, and then you don't know where your day is going to take you, and you just say yes. And that might take you over the bridge sometimes. It might take you into the mission. It might take you somewhere else. You might meet somebody. You might meet a guy at Dolores Park. There's like a whole, like, self, sort of discovery that you can go through, and I just love that. And you kind of start taking it for granted. And then I was with my wife in Golden Gate Park. It was, like, mid-COVID. We're just like, let's go to this field. This field looks nice. And it was like, oh, of course there's like a silent disco on this field.
Yeah,
there's like a DJ with like a little like turntable or whatever, like link. And like, of course. And of course people are, and like, what other city is that happening? And I just love that. And you could go almost anywhere and experience that sort of like, this is like, this exists here.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well said. I'm good. I'm glad that we're both representing this place that has been so formative for us. Okay. Let's do some questions, and then if you have them, and Car is gonna select some folks, and we can both answer as needed.
I'm the picker. Great. I saw you first. Red sweatshirt.
Yeah. So granted, I didn't read the book, but even just reading the intro notes and the jacket and the intro that you made, it seems like this theme of the AI and the relationship with humanity is core to the book. And the warnings about like AIs and technology are as old as literature. If you go back to the ancient Greeks, but it seems like now we're in a time in the last maybe 50 years where they're coming back up as a prominent. And I'm wondering, like, how do you think about like your role as an author, science fiction author, or just like in general as a person who's writing to people, like in talking about these topics, which are complex because it goes both ways.
Absolutely, that's a great question. Yeah, how do we think about this renewed interest and sort of conversation around AI and the future of AI and the dangers, and how does a particular science fiction writer play into that? I'm going to tell you what I tried to do, and then when you read the book and when others read the book, you can decide for yourself whether I succeeded or not. I wanted to go beyond the sort of superficial level of, I read a lot about AI in the newspaper and maybe even in academic papers, and I thought about it, and then I put it into the book. I wanted, and I did. I worked on this stuff, and I kind of dug into the code, into the there's emotions in this stuff. It's not just thoughts. It's, you're gonna set up this little model, and you're gonna try to train it on a big bundle of old public domain science fiction stories that you've gotten from the Internet Archive, and see what it emerges with. And it takes a really long time, so you have to run it overnight. This is a different era. This is very pre-Anthropic. But you wake up in the morning, and you've got your coffee, and you're excited to check on your weird little AI model that's been running, just churning all night. That's a feeling. And I think a whole bunch of those feelings and experiences give you a real intuitive sense for the actual grain of this material. And so maybe what I want to say is that there's a difference between someone writing a novel that has, I don't know, motorcycles in it, and they've just, seen and admired motorcycles, and someone writing a novel that features some motorcycles, and they've actually like rebuilt some motorcycles. It seems plain that you're going to get some, and I'm not saying one is better than the other at all, but you're going to get a kind of different view of the substance. And I have tried to do a bit of the latter with Moonbound. So we'll see. We'll see if that's valuable.
And then we had a question right in front center. You right there.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. This is about Mr. Penumbra 25 Is that all right?
Absolutely.
In part one of the bookstore, Ajax Penumbra says to Cleojanin and hang on, let me find it. Jesus. Oh, there we go. the thing about the libraries is that they are all different. Sorry, the genius of the libraries is that they are all different. Koster in Berlin with his music, Griboyev in St. Petersburg with his great samovar, and here in San Francisco, the most striking difference of all. What's that? Why, we have books that people might actually want to read for numbers of politics and shows a big grin. I laugh too. This suggests that in addition to the unbroken spine, there is some kind of society behind every creative pursuit. Can you speak to that, and does Moonbound speak to that?
I think Moonbound, not consciously, but Moonbound does speak to that. The question is, for folks who have read Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, there's, of course, the Unbroken Spine, a society of obsessive bibliophiles. We wouldn't know anything about that. But yeah, right. But I do. I kind of nod to these other, forms, other media in other places. I think this is of course, maybe not canon per se, because I'm just kind of figuring out on the spot, but I think absolutely there are other unbroken spines, because what that secret society is founded on is, we were talking about this earlier, the longevity, the superpower of print at its best, cared for, with great diligence. These things can outlast lifetimes and many many, many lifetimes. We know that other forms of art and culture can do the same thing. So, of course, there are other unbroken spines. I guess it would be like the unbroken keyboard and, the unbroken the unstretched canvas. Whether that connects to Moonbound consciously, I have to report that it does not. But there is a lot about human culture and how human culture lasts a long time, longer than you expect in this book. So I think there's probably some resonance there. Thank you for the question. That's great.
Yeah.
Right here, Flannel.
Earlier you mentioned the way that you have kind of like Easter eggs and references and links to other things in your books, and I really enjoyed that in the last two. And I'm curious, is that a theme that there's a lot of in this? And I'm curious what your inspiration for that as a literary technique was. Like, are there other authors that did that thing?
Yeah. So well, the question is, what's up with all the Easter eggs? There's a lot of Easter eggs in this one. I think they might be more subtle. I guess we'll see whether they're subtle or obvious or whatever. You all can report back to me. One of the reasons I do them, and this might be a little unhinged as a writer, I'm really allergic to the arbitrary, which is, it's all arbitrary, it's all made up. And yet, even things like numbers, it's really stupid, but any number you encounter in Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore is a prime number. Because at least then it's something, it's not like, 14, what a stupid number. 14 just sucks. But 13 is primo, 23 is even better. And so that's the most basic version of that, but then you can kind of scaffold up from there and you can find all sorts of ways of making things meaningful. It's not a huge deal. It's not like some, secret message being beamed into people's brains, but it's just a reason to choose one thing and not another. And I guess, especially in the era of Google, if someone does go looking, if they get curious about anything in a book, I want there to be something. I want it to not be like, I guess he just made it up. I want it to be like a little pathway that leads somewhere else. So
I think that's
the method.
I think I really appreciate it. It's definitely not like to get that reference, which I think is like a pet peeve of mine with books, and I think you navigate that really nicely.
Right here.
Any other questions? Hey, right here.
Are you planning on making a graphic novel for Moonbound? And if not, can you?
That is a good question. Oh, it's a tantalizing question. Yeah, am I planning? So, two-part question. I am not currently planning on making a graphic novel for Moonbound. I maintain that the graphic novel is actually the most perfect art form. We were talking about different forms of art before. I'll go to the mat for this. I think it's the one. Everything's good in different ways, but comics are actually the best, I think. And people who know me know that I've been saying that I'm going to learn how to draw for like 20 years. So I don't know. It would be awesome to at least try to create a comic story set in this world, and maybe I'll get myself organized to do it sometime.
I think we can take one more question and then go with someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Richard.
Hi. I was curious how you think as an author, because I feel like one of the coolest things you get to do is like create your own like multiverse or universe. Like we have like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then you have like the different authors will do different things with it. And I'm curious, like, is that exciting to you? Do you see that as that same like video game plot? Like, do you want to build out your like Robin Sloan universe?
Yeah. So the question is like, right? What is the extended cinematic universe? I do. I think a door has been opened in writing and creation that will be hard to close again. The recognition that you can do that, you can weave it all together, and it doesn't have to be as tightly linked as Marvel, or one of these book series that are all so woven close together. I think of someone like the writer who wrote Cloud Atlas, David Mitchell, right? And I think maybe some people in the room know that David Mitchell's novels are actually set in the same loosely extended world. You get the sense some of this was kind of folded in after the fact, but that's wonderful too. The idea that you're going to make that your project. I'm going to make it all fit. And why is that so appealing? I don't know. I think it goes to that thing about sense making. You want things to feel in some sense like they belong together and like they're inevitable. And maybe just because it's kind of a meta genre that sits above the rest. There's fantasy, there's science fiction, there's romance. I mean, there's literary fiction, there's everything. And in any of those, you can also kind of layer on that bonus genre of, the extended universe. So mine is called the Penumbraverse. And the links are pretty loose. It's more David Mitchell than Marvel. But for the very, very observant readers, there are some Easter eggs in Sourdough that link back to Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. And I will just go ahead. This is not necessarily 100% obvious in the book, but as a reward for coming out tonight, you get access to secret knowledge, which is that the narrator of this book, you'll learn very early on, is a very strange and interesting character. And this narrator is a direct descendant. This is canon, a direct descendant of the sourdough starter from sourdough. So now you know. That's a great question.
I lied.
Okay.
We're gonna do one more question. Read that.
You mentioned kind of your influences with Ian Banks, Le Guin, and I was wondering kind of how you balance when creating something new, some of those older influences that you really, as a kid, you might have internalized or younger in life, and the video games as well, versus things that you've come across more recently.
Yeah.
Books that you've read in the last 5 years, or video games or whatever, and kind of how you balance those influences.
Yeah. The question of influence. I mean, I think the answer is that the more recent stuff is always going to be present. It's just up there and kind of the top of the stew, and so it kind of asserts itself, I think, just naturally. It's the things you're excited about now. Frankly, it's the books I read and I go, oh, that's good. That's infuriatingly good. That's sort of, there's actually a little bit of a competitive spirit there, which is a great thing. Ray Naylor, a book called The Mountain in the Sea. I'm just like, it makes me mad that it's so good and so cool. Yeah. So those are there, and they kind of don't need my help to make them present when I'm sitting down to write this kind of stuff. I think the older stuff actually does take a bit of nudging, and I'll just say that one thing that has made a difference for me is not only thinking hard about those influences, but finally going back to look at the influences on those influences. I mean, I never knew who C.S. Lewis read before a few years ago, and now I do, and I've gone back and I've read some of those books or tried and sort of failed to read some of those books, which are, I mean, they're antique. It's just from a different language, and everything is from a different era. The vibes are, it's weird vibes. But that very fact helps me appreciate how C.S. Lewis and others, you can kind of take any of these lineages, isolated what was great and carried it forward a generation or a few generations, and it kind of has made me feel more grateful to them for doing that. And so part of it is not, I mean, it's not just a question of like, oh, is it just an imitation, or how do I hew too close to this influence or not? No, it's really grabbing onto it and saying, well, I want to do that. I want to light my torch, or one of my many torches, on that flame and try to carry it forward and renew it for new readership. That's the attempt anyway.
Thank you. Can we get a hand for Robin Sloan? Thank you for including us on this tour for Moonbound. It's not even out yet.
I know, it's magical.
We're very grateful. And Green Apple has a special connection to Robin Sloan, so we're very happy to be a part of this. And Mike, thank you so much for your time and attention and being such a thorough reader and being really generous with your reading and questions with Robin. Thank you all for being pretty rad. You've been really thorough and great, and like also very thoughtful in your questions. And Robin, you're really lucky to like have such great friends.
I agree.
think it's really cool. We're really glad to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna be very brief and give you just a little bit of mechanics, logistics. So here we go. My colleague Jeff, can you show people who you are and where you are? Right there. Jeff is the start of the signing line. So you can line up behind Jeff, and it's going to go against this wall over here. We're trying to maximize the space. Don't all stampede. Don't all get up. But there's plenty of time for everyone over there. Line up behind Jeff. And we have copies available at the front register if you do not have one yet. And if you have any other questions, let me know. And if not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just the best. I always need to remember the time. You're the best. Okay.